Can you give us some sense of the therapeutic landscape vis-a-vis these BTK inhibitors like ibrutinib and PI3 kinase inhibition, and where do you think this will play out in relapsed refractory? And we can leave the upfront for another moment or two.
Yeah, I think I'll be interested to hear Brad's perspective, but the PI3 kinase inhibitors, when you look at the genetic models, the P110 delta knockout mouse has colitis. And as these agents have moved from relapse disease, where again, very high response rates, just like ibrutinib, to the upfront setting, there's been more suggestion of colitis and and hepatotoxicity. And again, it's reversible transaminitis, where unlike most therapies, when you give them in more advanced disease, you see more toxicities. I would say with GS1101 and there's less experience with the other P110 delta inhibitors. There may be a suggestion of a little bit more toxicity in patients who are more immune naive, and this is probably an immunologic effect. And so, if I had to guess where these agents will be used, it likely will be ibrutinib or another BTK inhibitor first line. And again, the question remains to be answered: will patients who progress through ibrutinib, respond to the P110 delta inhibitors? My guess is they will. From the little bit of information that we know about resistance to ibrutinib, it appears that that pathway is still activated, and it just bypasses the drug being able to bind to the target. So my guess is that the P110 delta inhibitors in CLL at least will be used as second-line therapy.
Fundamental question to ask you: all these new drugs are very effective with low toxicity. Do you think we'll get to a point where we'll start treating patients that are asymptomatic, stable, and moving away from the current approach and wait and see, or try and treat everybody? I guess that depends if it improves survival, but can you comment on this?
Yeah, well, I think there are really high-risk patients where we know that they have genomic instability that's starting, and that it's clear that proliferation contributes to that, and the cell turnover contributes to that, and that these agents disrupt that. And so I think in that patient group, that these agents are going to be ideal to target to that patient population. But those studies take a long time to do, and the endpoints from a regulatory standpoint are really difficult to attain. There hasn't been a drug approved for that indication in CLL, and probably to be able to give it in that patient population, one is going to need a registration study, which will be very challenging. I don't know, Brad, what do you think?
I totally agree. If that kind of a study is attempted, and I do believe there is one being designed through the U.S. Cooperative Group system as we speak, it will be in the early stage patient, asymptomatic, but who has some sort of high-risk biological feature. And we'll see if that delays an important clinical endpoint, such as time to first cytotoxic therapy or something like that.
How about the monoclonal antibodies? We haven't even touched on that. Ofatumumab, others. Are these in sequence? Are you going to envision some sort of R-CHOP for CLL or follicular lymphoma, or a novel combination in mantle cell lymphoma? Where do you see this coming out?
Yeah, well, I would say at this meeting, the last ASH, the buzz was about ibrutinib, and there's a lot about ibrutinib at this meeting, but I would say the buzz at this meeting is about obinutuzumab, also known as GA101, which is a glycoengineered CD20 antibody that also induces direct killing. And I think all of the CLL investigators really didn't know, was this going to be a very modest advance or a big advance? And at the plenary session, there's going to be a randomized phase 3 study comparing, it was a 3-arm study that looked at chlorambucil versus chlorambucil plus rituximab versus chlorambucil plus obinutuzumab. And everybody knew the answer, that adding obinutuzumab or rituximab to chlorambucil was going to beat chlorambucil alone. That was no surprise. But I think what everybody was surprised by was the chlorambucil plus rituximab study had about a 15-month progression-free survival, and whereas the obinutuzumab plus chlorambucil had a median progression-free survival of about 28 months. And there's a survival advantage associated with obinutuzumab plus chlorambucil. So there's a lot of excitement about that antibody, And say from that study, and again, it was a secondary endpoint showing a very, very high CR rate by MRD. And that's not something that we've seen with CD20 antibodies with cytotoxic therapies. And so I think everybody's really excited that obinutuzumab is going to be a great CD20 antibody to build on, with these kinase inhibitors, or with ABT199, or some of the other new therapies that are coming forward.
I saw that data for the first time today in detail, and I was stunned, frankly, at the magnitude of the benefit from the obinutuzumab. If I had bet money a few years ago, I would have thought no improvement over rituximab or a small improvement over rituximab, but the benefit was large. It was much larger than I would have predicted. And so really then the next question is, can you extrapolate that benefit to other backbones like bendamustine or FC and take that benefit that they saw in this very elderly population and apply it to the younger population? So that's sort of the next frontier for that antibody in frontline CLL management. I will say we don't know yet in lymphoma. Those studies are ongoing, and we just don't know whether this obinutuzumab anti-CD20 monoclonal will have the same benefit in NHL that we're seeing in CLL, which just goes to show you that unfortunately, you have to do all these trials in the different subtypes to really sort out where the efficacy lies.
When I heard that this was going to be a plenary session, initially I was very skeptical. It's like, we've not had a plenary session for CLL in 9 years, and why is this? But I agree with Brad, and it's very important to realize this is the first time ever any therapy has been shown to prolong survival in elderly CLL. So the patients that are not fit, which represents 2/3 of the patients with CLL, the patients that most people see in practice. And so I think this is going to be a major game changer for how the majority of patients are treated with CLL. And the only challenge is, I think in Europe they use chlorambucil. In the United States we don't use chlorambucil as much. But I would say the results from this trial look better than anything that's been published with bendamustine and rituximab or other regimens that people use, really without much data, in elderly CLL.